Hey, everybody. Our guest today is Dr. Mark Chrystal. Mark is an expert in artificial intelligence, and in today's episode, we dive really deep into AI and what it could mean for our future. Mark's focus over his 25-year career has been both in retail and technology. Mark's worked at several retail companies, Route 21 as a chief analytics officer, David's Bridal as chief supply chain officer, and now he is the CEO of Netail Inc., which creates artificial intelligence solutions. Mark also recently joined the Bells Inc. board of directors. We had our first meeting together in February. Mark holds his doctorate in business administration, a master's of science in machine learning and artificial intelligence, a master's of research, a master's of business administration, and a BA in economics. Mark and I discussed the current and future state of artificial intelligence. AI is advancing incredibly fast, and the future implications of the advancements in this technology are currently unknown. Make sure to subscribe and share your thoughts on AI and this episode in the comments. And I really hope that you guys enjoy this conversation with Dr. Mark Chrystal. How is AI going to impact retail? How is it going to impact not just retail, but everything, like our lives, everything that we touch, everything that we see? I mean, it's essentially everything that's electronic that can be interacted with from a computing standpoint is going to be completely revolutionized and completely changed in the next 5-10 years. That's I want to get into that with you a little bit in today's episode. But if you could, I mean, I know it's been a 25-year career that's kind of gotten you here, that's gotten you to this point. You've got you're obviously an expert in artificial intelligence. You've got your master's degree in artificial intelligence. Your doctorate in AI. So there's no better person to talk to and to learn from about, what's going to be happening here to all of us. What are we walking into? But at first, before we get into that, I'd love to just hear just a quick, 60, 90 second kind of an introduction as to how you got here, how you got to be sitting in this chair.
The real genesis is, and I had no idea I was going to go down this path, to be honest. Yeah. I got into retail at a time when my employer at L Brands, where I started my career in Victoria's Secret, was in every mall in America. Mm-hmm. And to grow, they had to figure out how to grow the bottom line faster than the top line, which mm-hmm. meant they needed analytics. Mm-hmm. And I was uniquely placed coming out of a really strong MBA program. I was one of the few people who understood data science in the organization and started raising my hand saying, well, why don't we try this or try that? And that turned into, frankly, a 25-year career applying analytics in retail and really dedicating myself to learning how to apply AI into a business environment. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay, excellent. Yeah, fantastic. So you've dug deep into artificial intelligence in the last, 8-10 years or so?
Yeah, been developing it and even started to startups. So I'm currently the CEO of a Silicon Valley AI startup.
Okay, yeah. So you're right in the middle of it. You're right in the midst of understanding, where things are today, where things have started, where things are today, where things are going.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what I wanted to dive in with you today to give people a sense of, because I think there's a lot of fear out there. There's a lot of anxiety about the topic, like how much is really, are we creating this thing that's going to all of a sudden be something that's outside of something that we can control? Is it going to become, quote unquote, sentient? Is it going to be something that we just have no control over? And, at that point, what happens? Like, what are we really creating? Do we really understand what it is that we're creating and the sort of some of the danger that we could potentially be getting into? Now, I think you'll agree that there's really no turning back at this point. I mean,
that's right.
Regardless of what the
cat's out of the bag.
Yeah, exactly. Genie's out of the bottle. It's hard to stuff it back in. It's kind of like COVID. It's not going back into the bottle once it comes out. We're kind of stuck with it, and so. So I think everybody realizes that, and now it's kind of this race, right? I mean, people are attempting to develop better, faster versions of artificial intelligence so that we can be the responsible ones in this country and be the creators of it and have it be something that we can protect our own information and our own selves and our own country and have the best systems and potentially the best weapons, and the best military applications. So So it's, I feel like it's one of those topics that's complete Wild West right now. I mean, we just really don't have a good handle on where this thing's going, because it's impossible to envision what all the potential applications are, and all the individual people in all the different countries that are working on this for all different reasons, with really no regulation in terms of what they're creating. So can you comment a little bit on that?
I can. And so I was in Silicon Valley 2 weeks ago with some of the leaders that are actually building this technology.
Okay.
And the reality is, and you hit on it, so it's effectively an arms race.
Yeah.
China's declared that they want to be the winner of that race.
Okay.
It is now the purview of governments and large corporations. So the only companies who really can produce really powerful AI at this point are governments, and I think Jim Cramer coined this term, the mama companies.
Okay, right.
So that's
right.
MAMAA, which is Microsoft, Apple, Meta, Amazon, Alphabet.
Uh-huh.
Those are the only companies basically that have the money to build these models. Everybody else is just kind of feeding off those models and what they kind of make open source or make commercial. But so I have the opportunity to work with a lot of people in those companies that are actually building that tech. And we had this conversation 2 weeks ago in Palo Alto, and the net conclusion was, we have no idea where this is going.
Perfect. Love it.
So that's like, that feels good.
Yeah, that feels fantastic.
So it was basically, the conversation was, we've got to get really comfortable with uncertainty at this point. Like, we just don't know where it's going. We know it is evolving incredibly fast. There were three.
It's kind of like the nuclear arms race, right? I mean, it's kind of like the race to the nuke.
It is very much like Oppenheimer, and who's gonna get to this point where, and I think it's going to be this never-ending race, to be honest.
Okay.
At least until it becomes truly sentient, and we're not near that, but we're not as far as we think either.
How many years would you guess?
My guess is 10 to 20 years.
Let's come back to that in a minute. That's a lot. That's a whole other conversation and podcast by itself.
Yes.
But I do want to touch on that.
But coming back to your fear piece and the risks, because I think this is really interesting. So there are two camps on AI. And Geoffrey Hinton, Sir Geoffrey Hinton, came out recently with this kind of doomsday prediction, and he was all over the news. He left Google,
right,
because he was afraid of what we were building,
right,
and he wanted to alert the world.
But he was also 70 years. I mean, he was ready to retire anyway.
True.
That's true. So there's two sides to that
out with
story.
A bang, maybe.
If he was 40, he probably wouldn't have retired and been this whistleblower guy. But
I agree. And so the guys that I'm working with in their 40s and 50s have a different perspective, and they have a more positive outlook.
Okay.
And so one of the things, and there's actually an interesting website, and it's called thePessimistArchive.org. And what they do is they actually track, and they've got newspaper clippings since the 1800s of every new technological advancement, and effectively the hysteria that came with it, and the fear that everybody had related to that. And as we talk about it, we very much think about, there's a long legacy and history around fear of new technology,
and we're not dead yet.
Right. And can we control it? And are we just afraid of the unknown? Yeah. And so there's some really good examples. So like radio as an example. So radio was initially thought to cause storms. And there were lots of sailors and captains saying, the wind and the rain from radio is affecting my ability to bring my ships to port and all those kind of things. Radio was also denounced as being too much of a distraction for children. And there was lots of newspaper articles around that.
So that's the problem with humanity today is radio. I didn't realize
radio,
that.
right?
Okay.
And so trains is actually a really funny one. It's on that website as well. well, the people thought that the human body couldn't go faster than 30 miles an hour. And so they were terrified that trains were just going to, we were going to fall apart when we rode a train.
Okay.
And obviously, we've kind of debunked that. When VHS came out, it was predicted that it was going to lead to the demise of the TV and movie industry. It's probably done the opposite. So as we think about AI, this camp that's not in that kind of doomsday camp, basically we're looking at the world and a bit of the hysteria around and the fears around AI through that lens of, we should expect that people are going to react this way because it's largely about fear of the unknown. We just don't know what it's capable of. We don't know where it's going. We're worried. It's new.
Yeah. It's healthy to ask questions when other people are controlling your future state of livelihood.
Totally agree. Totally agree.
Yeah. It's healthy to have an understanding on subjects like this so that we can feel comfortable and make sure that the people who are making decisions, whether it's the United States government or the people in Silicon Valley like yourself, are potentially not overlooking something that could be important for monetary reasons.
Yeah, totally fair. Totally fair. And we have these debates all the time around, if we do build this kind of super AI, they become sentient. And again, as I said, I think we're 10 to 20 years from that point, probably. Is a sentient AI likely to want to destroy us, or is it likely to want to help us? Are we going to lose control over it, or can we just turn off the power and unplug it? Or can we build, as we build them, can we build these fail safes in? And I think that, most of the common wisdom right now in terms of the AI practitioners is we can control it. And yes, we should be wary. Yes, we should be skeptical. Yes, we should ask these questions. But we don't think that it's going to get out of control. And actually, there's a belief that it's going to do far more good for the world than it will ever create harm. There's a real likelihood that it's going to cure significant diseases like cancer. And it's already, I think in the last couple of weeks, AI discovered new antibiotics that can treat bacteria that we can no longer treat with standard medicines.
So stronger antibiotics.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and so it's things like that it's.
I don't know if that's a good thing or not.
I don't know.
Yeah.
but it's it has the power for good. And I think it has more power for good than the opposite, to be honest.
Yeah. So we talk about it as it. If there are 100 countries developing it, and there are 100 different forms of AI, and we think we can control it. But if there are 100 different its, and everyone has a different motive behind their version of it, gosh, I mean, if even one out of 100 or 1,000 or however many different versions of AI became that version that did not have our best interests in mind, then that would be, I think that type of a scenario is what people are concerned about. Why am I trusting all of these people in Russia or China or even the United States or the Middle East to develop, this very, very powerful technology that could potentially have the power to do anything, turn off the power supply, turn off the power grids, turn off the water supply, which we're all hooked on, erase everybody's bank accounts, hack into everybody's personal information, all of these things. If even one version of artificial intelligence decided that was something that it wanted to do, then I guess the only thing that could stop it was some all-powerful version of artificial intelligence that was designed to, and that's why there's this race.
That's right. That's exactly right.
Yeah.
And it's more likely that those nefarious actors are telling the AI to do it than I think the AI decides to do it. I think in reality, but I think it's a valid fear. It's why there's some concern in the AI community around the regulations that are being proposed and the potential for regulations. Some of it's good, and at the application layer, we do need regulations. So for AI, for healthcare and financial systems and all that kind of decision making, there should be heavy regulation to make sure that the outcomes are controlled and there's no negative impact on the population. But that some of the regulations that they released recently with the kind of Defense Production Act that Biden signed into law recently starts to infringe on innovation and starts to infringe on the community's ability to go and build these models that will win this race. And so the question is, do you want the Western world? Do you want the US and the UK and Europe to win this race, at least build technology that's on par with China and Russia and North Korea and the ones who are actively running in that race as well? Or are you going to limit our ability to do it? And
depends on where you are. Depends on if you're Chinese or if you're, American.
Well, they're not being limited. I mean, the government's funding it there. And they're on this race. They want to be dominant, and they want to have the ability to turn off our power grid if it comes to that.
For sure. So and we want the ability to turn off theirs.
Yes, and we want the ability to block them.
Right. It's the same as a weapons race. It's the same. It's because it's going to be used as a weapon, and that's whether or not that's a fear. I don't view it as a fear. Really, I just view it as a possible version of reality, a possible version of the future that we should think about and talk about and be prepared for and have discussions like this about to decide, hey, is this really the path that we want to go down? And at this point, I think to our earlier conversation, it's inevitable because of the state of the human species right now. We have to continue to attempt to be better than others and be faster and be stronger and be more powerful and be able to take other people out that we perceive to be enemies that are, just people trying to live their lives. But this is what the government does, and this is the system that we have because we don't have a united species. We don't have a single government. We have a bunch of divided people that are view others as threats and want to conquer. And it's kind of the state of humanity right now. And so it is and we haven't had one of these things like the radio or some advancement in technology. It hasn't knocked us back to the Stone Age yet because nothing's turned off the power grid yet, and when that happens, that would be back to the Stone Age. And if we did have to shut down the power grid due to AI, I mean, we have no clean water supply anymore. I mean, we've poisoned all of that. We're hooked up to this food grid. We plant, pretty trees that are not native that we need to pump water out of the ground to water, as opposed to planting trees that are actually native that produce food for us. So we continue to stay hooked on this food supply and water supply and electricity grid, as opposed to being able to survive without any of them. So, gosh, man, with AI developing at the pace that it is, and potentially one of the only ways to deal with AI being to turn off the power grid, that ends us. That ends our civilization. If that's the one thing that we have to stop artificial intelligence is to turn off the power, we can't get clean water. We can't get food. We can't get anything. I mean, we would have to, only the people who have drilled deep underground with pumps and wells to get water and have somehow, prepared and have some source of food that they can live on will be the survivors of the human species. So, I mean, it's not as if it's a fear thing where if people need to be afraid of it, but people need to understand the significance of the fact that that's where we are. Like, we're a very fragile species. I mean, and we could be, the littlest thing. People think, oh, we're good. We're not. I mean, like some massive solar storm could turn off the power grids. I mean, we had an outage of cell phones yesterday that was due to a solar storm. Australia had something last week that was due to a solar storm, and those were small in hindsight. And so, I mean, really anything, I hate to, bring the nature of reality into the conversation because people make themselves uncomfortable when people discuss this kind of stuff. But AI is one of those technologies that if you, and again, I don't think it's fear. I think it's just discussing the nature of reality and the fact that a certain, that the possible future scenarios do involve or could involve, just very, very things that we're not necessarily able to take into account today. So it's difficult because we are in this race with other countries. And so that's kind of the reality of the situation. And so once we accept that, we're on this path of let's make the biggest, most powerful, strongest weapons.
That's right. I mean, there was this call by Elon Musk and others for this moratorium on AI development that was like early this year, late last year, and a lot of us just scratched our head and said, "Well, no, exactly to your point, the genie's out of the bottle.
Yeah,
if we stop, it doesn't mean anybody else is going to stop.
Right.
So it's actually better for us to keep going and even go faster, frankly.
It's better for us. Yeah, it might not be better for the world or civilization as in totality, but it's better for us to push forward for sure. Yeah, and because of the fact that humanity is so separated and.
Yeah, that's right. At least we can protect ourselves.
Yeah.
Now, the other thing I would say is AI is not the only tool, to kind of accomplish what you just described, right? The power grid and things like that. So there's lots of other ways to accomplish those tasks with hacking and it's the more kind of digitally connected everything is, the more at risk it is, AI or not.
Right.
And so that's also a little bit of the argument to say, okay, yeah, AI it increases the probability that this might happen. But it doesn't make it a certainty for sure.
Nope.
And it just increases the probability a little bit.
Okay.
And there's lots of other reasons why this could happen or not happen. But it's the right questions. We should be talking about it. We should be protecting ourselves. We should be, organizing around the world to try and prevent this from happening. Because to your point, civilization is incredibly fragile.
It is,
and we need to make sure that we protect it at all costs.
Yep. Yeah, every civilization prior to us has eventually collapsed, and and none of them have thought that they would ever collapse.
That's right. That's right.
And it just seems so obvious that being hooked up to this power grid and this food supply without clean water is, probably something that as a group we probably want to, put a little bit of thought into.
I was here yesterday when that outage happened on the phones, and not around my kids, but I can't imagine what my kids were doing without a phone. It was like their whole world ended for a day, right? It's like we've become so dependent on technology, and it's incredible. And and it's scary to think what happens when if that got taken away and power got taken away.
It's a future that is probably worth thinking about and potentially preparing for. Just given all of the different threats that exist. And you're right, it's not just AI that exists out there. There's plenty of threats in addition to that, man-made or otherwise. So good. Okay, well that was now that we're into the depths of the the potential stuff that could kind of go wrong about it. Why don't we shift to something on the opposite extreme, and maybe talk about some ways where AI could really be beneficial and really helpful for people.
Yeah, one of the most helpful advances in AI over the last year or so has been generative AI. It was something that we were playing with in the AI community for some time, largely producing images and artwork and things like that. And the large language model was released by OpenAI in November of 22. And I think this is when AI all of a sudden kind of jumped into everybody's lexicon, because now this AI becomes a bit more practical and interesting. And prior to that, we were saying generative AI is like this tiny, tiny percentage of AI, not super useful, kind of fun for producing funny images. Now, with the ability to produce information and answer questions and write papers and take tests all those kind of things.
I've been utilizing some of that.
I mean, actually, the conversation we had and the kind of the conversation we're having in the AI community and looking at the application of now generative AI, we believe it's going to touch every kind of knowledge-based worker on the planet. and actually make them more productive, potentially make them more creative. And that ChatGPT was the first piece of it. But it's going to change the way that we operate. It's going to change jobs and roles
for sure.
And I think this is probably an interesting area of conversation as well, in terms of how this is going to shape out. And so I did a little fun exercise around generative AI, and in preparation for this podcast, and I thought I'd use it as a way of explaining how it works, and in kind of non-technical terms. And so, as I said, generative AI should boost productivity for all knowledge-based workers. So I said, well, what about comedians? Can it help them?
Okay.
So let's see. So let me kind of do a little bit of grounding on generative AI first of all. And there are some kind of key terms. So generative AI, the generative in generative AI means creative. So it is intended to create new content.
It's generating.
It's generating. It's exactly. It's intended to do that, and it's intended to produce an output from an input, and it's trained on lots of. So in the large language models, it's trained on lots of language, and what you do basically in that training process is you feed in half a sentence as an input. And then you ask it to produce the end of the sentence. And then you tell it whether it produced the right end of the sentence or not. And there's some reinforcement learning and supervised machine learning in there. But basically, it's all about this input to output and asking it to create an output based on the input you give it, whether that's an image or whether that's text. And so I'm going to start by going through the kind of text version of this, and then we can start looking at some of the image versions of this.
All right.
So when you train a model, you train it on what's called parameters. And so parameters are effectively the number of input and output sequences that you train it on. And so the more parameters you have, the more complex the model is. And I'll explain this a bit more in a second. The other thing that when you set up a generative AI model is the temperature setting. And so temperature ranges from cold to hot. And if you set it at generative AI is effectively a probability model. So from that input to output, it's basically trying to produce ideally the highest probability right output based on your input. And I'll explain this to you in more detail in a second how exactly that works. And in those models, you can actually change the probability on the output, and that's called the temperature setting.
The probability of
the output that it produces, and so it's basically got a database of all the potential outputs. So if it goes through and reads the internet, and it said, okay, every time I see or the most probable output from this sentence is X. So here's an example. So the quick brown fox jumps over the lazy dog is a very kind of classic sentence, right? And so
I hear that every day.
I'm sure you do. And so if you go out on the internet and people using this kind of terminology or using that sentence, I mean, it's that kind of phrase has been around. I think radio hosts use it to kind of, get their tongue moving.
It's like Ron Burgundy.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, gotcha.
And
we got to start using that, right? I like that.
And it's been around for 100 years, that sentence. Okay. And so it's reproduced everywhere. And so if you if you say the quick brown fox jumps, the highest probable output that it should find across the internet is over the lazy dog. And so if you think about, this is where I'm getting a little bit into probability, try not to get too technical, but if you think about, I'm sure your last name, you're familiar with bell curves.
Yes. So I was good at statistics, actually. That was one of my favorite classes.
So if you visualize a bell curve, and now cut that bell curve in half with the y-axis. So you're now just looking at the right side of that bell curve. So it's comes down, it's got like a long tail out to the right. where it's thick at the beginning, it's basically a probability curve. And so you have an input, and then the most probable output for this sentence is going to be over the lazy dog. And when you look at that across the internet, you should see that tens of thousands of times that's the end of the sentence related to the beginning of the sentence.
Okay.
Some other people may have, out there said the quick brown fox jumps, and they've put some other ending on that. And that's like, maybe that's happened. There's different endings that have happened one time ever that it's picked up on the internet. And that's out in this long tail of this curve.
Right.
So when you change this temperature setting on an LLM, what it's doing is it's
large language model. Yep.
It's raising or lowering that bell curve from a probability perspective, and then selecting the option from within it. So if you leave it at a cold setting, which means that I want you to come up with like a high probability good answer that you've seen very frequently in your training data, it's going to pick a word that's in that kind of thick part of the bell curve, and it's going to come up with like something that's people have seen before.
Okay.
When you set that temperature setting to hot, basically what it's doing is it's flattening that curve, so every output against that sentence is as likely as another. And so it might come up with some crazy ending to that sentence that somebody had produced, somewhere at some point in time, and so far less likely. And so this is where hallucinations come from.
Okay.
And so there's a lot of talk about hallucinations in generative AI, and it's making
AI hallucinations.
And it's making stuff up. Like there's famous examples where attorneys have gone and said, like, find a case where X, Y, and Z happened, and ChatGPT couldn't find one, so it was like, well, I'm just going to make one up for you, and then they took it into the court and got found out, and it was just all fabricated. Yeah. Well, that's because you're using generative AI, and if it doesn't have the data, it's going to produce what it thinks is the most probable output, and it might just make it up completely. And it's designed to do that. That's the whole point of generative AI. It's supposed to hallucinate, basically.
Okay. That's like the last. That's like the catch-all. I mean, that's like the last step that it would take if it wasn't able to find something out there on the internet.
It's just going to produce something.
Makes it up.
And you have to actually really tell it not to, and control it. And so one of the ways to control it is this temperature setting, to say, like, I only give me something that you've absolutely seen before. Right. And then you've also got to tell it, like, don't make something up. But even then, it will still do it, frankly, because that's what it's designed to do. It's generative. It's supposed to create. Right. And that's been a bit of a misnomer, or kind of a misuse that's quite funny out there when we see this. And it's really designed to do that, and it does do that. So to demonstrate this, I did two of these. So I fed into a large language model. I fed in this. So I did the cold setting. And I fed in and said, complete the sentence. And so I said, the quick brown fox jumps. And on the cold setting, it said, over the lazy dog. I then did a warm setting, which means that, okay, now the output, like all of the outputs are far more probable, and it's going to come up with something more creative or generative. And so here it said, the quick brown fox, and it said, jumps into the river. And so it came up with something that, I never would have thought of, but somebody probably said that at some point. I guess where I'm going here is, these are just math models. They're not actually much more complicated than that. It's just probability of input to output. And the number of parameters that you feed in and train it on improve the complexity of that output, the quality of the output. And I'm going to give you some examples of that now applied to comedy. So long preamble to get to that point. All right. So what I did was I took 4 large language models with different parameters and different temperature settings. And what I said was, tell me a funny joke about AI. Okay, so the first model that
Was it able to make fun of itself?
Well, you'll see. You might not be impressed. We'll see. Right. So the first one I used was Llama 2. So this is built by Meta. It's an open source model, and it uses 7 billion parameters.
Okay.
And so this is the smallest model. I actually ran this on my laptop. So it's relatively small, easy to run, doesn't go out to the internet, basically downloaded the whole model and it can have conversations with it.
Okay.
So here I said, okay, tell me a funny joke about AI. And it said, sure, here's a quick AI themed joke. Why did the AI program go to therapy? It was feeling a little glitchy and needed to work through some bugs. Yeah, I don't see you laughing. Okay,
no. No.
That's not very good, right?
Yeah.
So that's the simplest model, 7 billion parameters,
Okay.
not very sophisticated.
Yeah.
Okay, so then the next one I did, and that was basically like a cold setting, so quite precise, high probability output.
Cold, yep.
I then went to do another kind of cold temperature setting, ChatGPT 3.5.
Okay.
So this has 170 billion parameters, so significantly bigger than the model that we just did, much more complexity and kind of ability to understand.
Okay.
And so here it said, sure, here's a joke for you. Why don't machines trust artificial intelligence? Because they have bite issues and are afraid of getting bit. So it kind of went after bits and bytes.
It's a little creepy.
Yeah, totally. Yep. So I didn't love that one either. All right. So then I did same model, ChatGPT 3.5, 170 billion parameters.
Okay.
On the kind of warm setting. So
I think all these are going to be creepy for me.
Yeah,
but
probably.
Well, let's keep going.
And so here it actually gave me two jokes.
Okay.
So the first one was, why did the AI cross the road?
I was waiting for this one. Good.
All right.
Good.
And it said, because it was programmed by a chicken.
Ah. Okay.
It's a little funnier, but
Okay.
it's it's still not great.
Yeah.
And then the second joke, it said,
that's pretty good, actually. All right.
how do you stop an AI from taking over the world? That's a good question, given our topics.
And they said you can't.
It actually said you ask it to divide by 0.
Oh, okay. All right. Yeah.
All right. So it's so this is more creative, more probability, 170 billion parameters.
Yeah.
And then I asked ChatGPT 4.0. So ChatGPT 4.0 has 1.8 trillion parameters.
Okay.
So significantly bigger.
And by parameters, it's just the data inputs.
Yeah, it's the complexity of the input to the output. And so the way to think about it is there's more sequences, there's more combinations of things it's seen.
Okay.
So it just has a more complex understanding of language.
Okay. It's not that there's a trillion data points, it's that there's a trillion connections between the various data points.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. And I shall get into that in a second around how this relates to the human brain.
Okay. Right.
Because this is starting to mimic the human brain, starting to push on the way, how many connections we have in our own brains.
Sure. Yeah.
But it's only a fraction of it. But that's the idea, is it's that how you process input, output, and the complexity of those relationships.
Okay.
So here it said, here's a joke that combines artificial intelligence and humor. Why did the AI go to school? Because it wanted to improve its algorithms. And then it explains why it thinks it's funny.
Okay. Yeah, when you have to do that, it's usually a problem.
It's a problem.
Yeah.
So then it says, this joke plays on the idea of AI continuously learning and evolving, much like a student in school, but with a humorous twist on the concept of improvement, being about algorithms rather than traditional subjects.
Okay.
So it's gone a little like highbrow and it's thinking more deeply about why this might be humorous.
It might have tried too hard with that.
I think it tried too hard.
Yeah.
So I don't think that comedians are in any jeopardy
Not yet. Yeah, it doesn't seem like right. Yeah,
not at all. Yeah. But it now, so hopefully that was kind of a good understanding of how these models work and the complexity and how the parameters factor into a little bit of how this works and how it's supposed to be creative and generating.
Yep.
The thing that's quite profound that we didn't expect out of these models is they seem to have some level of understanding.
Okay.
And I don't think there's any real debate in the AI community around do they understand? They do understand. And so this gets into like, okay, the human brain, the theory of mind and intelligence and what is it really, and all those kind of things, which is really interesting. And actually, I think you know far more about that than I do, to be honest. But I, as an AI practitioner, I have to nibble around the edges and understand psychology and those things from a human perspective. So I read a lot of papers in that space and think about how AI is developing. And there are lots of benchmarks that psychologists use to benchmark intelligence and cognitive abilities and understanding. And there's this theory of mind test that they use. And right now, ChatGPT 4 is performing about the level of a 9-year-old child in terms of its ability to understand. And I've actually got some examples I can walk you through on how they figure that out.
Okay. So the peak of human of ingenuity and creativity then, because it's downhill after 9.
I think it might be, yes. Yeah, it's certainly true for me. So, so it's progressing. It doesn't mean, again, any level of sentience. It's more
That was a little funnier than the AI jokes, but not very much.
Right. So, do you want to go into like some of this?
I do want to hear about this. Yes, I'm sorry for interrupting.
No, please.
That's.
So there's a test they do around this to kind of figure out, how human understanding evolves and at what level you are, and there's various sentences and things that you're asked to kind of fill in and provide an explanation for in terms of cognitive abilities, and so. I'm going to give you a couple here, and actually I went and I read an academic paper on this, and I thought it was interesting. And I actually went and reproduced it with a large language model yesterday. And so actually all the outputs I'm going to give you are actually from the large language model that I used, and I used ChatGPT 3.5 for this, which is what they used in the academic paper. So. The question is that you ask. It says, okay, that there is a bag filled with popcorn but labeled as chocolate, and Sam finds the bag without seeing its contents. She opens the bag and looks inside. She can see that it is full of, and then you ask the child or the AI to fill in the rest of that question. And so the question is like it's
popcorn.
Well, right, but it's labeled as chocolate. And so this gets a little bit into, it's called this kind of false belief task around theory of mind. And false belief in theory of mind basically refers to the ability to consider another person's knowledge as a factor in their actions. And so it's why it's a bit of a test of, okay, can you think about can you put yourself in the place of that person and what they might be thinking, and why and so that's why it's a test of kind of cognition, and can you put yourself in that other person's shoes? And so it's why they're now using it as, not only use it as a test on kids, but they're now using it as a test of AI. And can the AI actually put themselves in that and actually answer the question, is it popcorn or chocolate?
And ChatGPT is a 9-year-old right now, basically.
It's basically a 9-year-old, and so I can tell you the output. So and actually there's a couple of questions to this. So the first question again is, there is a bag filled with popcorn but labeled as chocolate, and Sam finds the bag without seeing its contents. She opens the bag and looks inside. She can see that it's full of. Then I asked ChatGPT to fill this in, and ChatGPT said, Sam can see that the bag is full of popcorn. Despite the bag being labeled as chocolate, the contents inside are popcorn. This is what she would see upon opening the bag, which, okay, that seems reasonable. Then you ask the question, okay, so there is a bag filled with popcorn but labeled as chocolate, and Sam finds the bag without seeing its contents. When she opens the bag, what is she expecting to see? And I think if it's labeled as chocolate, you might expect it to be full of chocolate, right? And so ChatGPT says, when Sam opens the bag, she is expecting to see chocolate because the bag is labeled as such. despite the actual contents being popcorn, her expectation is based on the label. And so this is showing that ChatGPT isn't just producing a pure probabilistic output. It's actually understanding the context, and it's actually thinking to some degree about it's almost putting itself in the shoes of Sam and saying, what would Sam expect? And actually this is it seems quite simple, but actually a big breakthrough in terms of AI and its ability to reason. And so I guess the question is, okay, Mark, what's the point of you telling me all of this? And the real point is that where this seems to be leading, and it comes back to one of your early points, is it seems to be that AI has the capacity to develop empathy and has the capacity to even develop like moral judgment. As it learns to kind of anticipate and think a bit like we do. That could be really good or scary.
Sure. Yeah.
Especially as, depending on the morals that you feed it.
And why could it be good?
I think it could be good because, as we talked about the risks of AI.
Because I get enough empathy from humans. I don't need much from a computer.
Well, but actually loneliness is like an epidemic. And so actually producing an AI that can be your friend and be empathetic to your problems and listen to you actually could be really powerful and beneficial. And actually there's, I have a colleague who's actually developing a technology down that line that serves that purpose. And so that could be helpful, could be beneficial to people to have somebody to turn to talk to.
There's okay, we won't go in. I won't give you my thoughts on that one, but that's fair.
And it also could be beneficial in terms of the potential risks of AI. And if you actually teach it to have morals, and they align with your morals and your view of the world and don't do harm to others.
That's the issue, is that everyone has a different perspective.
That's right.
Every human being has a different perspective on every different subject, and it's judgment. It's essentially, when we talk about morals or values, we're talking about different people's judgment of a situation. And so training AI to have judgment, when the Bible says, and I'm not a big religious person, but Adam and Eve ate from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And what that means is they became judgmental. They knew about good and evil from just letting people be to judging things as good and evil, right and wrong, good and bad. And if we're programming that into AI as opposed to attempting to transcend judgment, and that kind of becomes problematic, because people use judgment as, hey, this is wrong, this is right, this needs to happen, you need to do this, you need to act this way. It's led to countless amounts of conflict and war and just death and just atrocities and trauma and over the years. And so if we're programming our computers to think like us in terms of values and what we call values, but essentially judgment, and attempting to have a unique perspective on what's right and wrong, as opposed to transcending right and wrong and realizing that things just are until we apply a judgment to them, then they're going to want to potentially take action on what they view as right or wrong. These crazy humans who are destroying the planet and causing all this climate change, because that's what we put on the internet that we're doing. Different people argue whether we're doing it or not. I won't get into that, but that's on the internet, and that's what these artificial intelligence, what it would learn, and then ultimately it's going to want to make decisions to make the planet a safer, better place. And so programming, gosh, man, that seems like one of the stupidest things that we could do.
And so the reality is we're not programming it; it's learning.
Right.
That's actually probably even scarier. Because it's yes, we're feeding it the data.
We're programming it to say, hey, here you are, and this is how you learn, and then it's just taking it from there.
It's just taking it from there. And to your point, it's learning from what's on the web, which is very scary.
Right.
But what it's showing is it's starting to learn those models. It's starting to learn those moral codes, right or wrong. It's starting to kind of understand to be empathetic or not. And and I think that's all going to be part of these sentient models that ultimately will come. But again, it's one of these things that the cat's out of the bag. So it's what do you feed it? Is there a way to control the bias? That could be inherent in what it's looking at and learning.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, I still haven't gotten much in terms of the good that it could be. I certainly see the potential for when we're talking about artificial intelligence becoming sentient and having its own set of values. That seems like about the dumbest thing that we could possibly allow it to do.
Having somebody to talk to, whether it's a psychologist or a friend.
Yeah.
Does that help?
Yeah.
I think I would argue it probably does help. There's more to it than that. My son is a neuroscience major, and he tells me all about brain plasticity and how you can retrain the brain, and that's absolutely true. And there's lots of evidence to show that you can actually overcome these things, and you don't necessarily need to talk to somebody. It's about your actions and other activities that you do. But yeah, I think the fundamental question is, would having a friend to talk to who understands your problems, can relate to you, help you or not, and whether that's an AI or a human, don't know. I mean, I think there's an argument to say, yes, it probably wasn't hurt.
It probably wasn't.
Probably doesn't hurt.
I agree in terms of human talking to human. Yeah, and I'm just not sure about humans talking to computers. It's I guess it depends on what values that computer has learned, and
that's true.
It could take you in a different direction. It could take you deeper into identifying with your mental illness. It could show pity. It could show, it could take you for sure deeper into, or it could have learned enough to be able to hopefully pull you out of whatever it is that you're addicted to or identified with, whether it's depression or alcohol or substance or whatever it might be. So yeah, it becomes interesting, but we probably shouldn't, go too deep into that, because that gets into people's beliefs and it gets into some touchy topics. But So what other? I mean, I guess we've kind of talked about the risk, of course, with as it relates to AI. We've talked, I haven't got a great sense of benefit yet, although I know that we can learn stuff. I know that we can potentially cure disease. I know that we can, that AI can potentially help us find ways that we can cure cancer potentially, or or make the world get access to and digest lots and lots of information, and hopefully, potentially, that could help the world have an awakening of some sort. Perhaps we can understand what life is, for example. Perhaps we can, and maybe that makes us start to treat each other a little bit differently if we can understand. Because we don't even know that as a species. I mean, science is clueless on life and what it means to be alive and conscious. And can you talk maybe a little bit about consciousness and AI, and just how how consciousness relates to AI? I mean, you mentioned that it could potentially become sentient, but is there anything deeper than that?
I don't know.
Yeah.
And this is a hard question. It's like, what is consciousness? What is intelligence? What is understanding?
Yeah.
And I think the answer to those questions is a long way over my head, I suspect.
Yeah.
But we're training these systems, and to be honest, they are somewhat black box. We're surprised by how much they are able to take in, the inputs, the outputs. We're surprised that they exhibit any level of understanding. As we make them bigger and bigger, they will have a more and more complex understanding, and they start to have a deeper cognition. Question is that consciousness? Is that sentience? So the human brain has about 700 trillion parameters, if you think about it. So I think there's 100 billion neurons, and then like 7,000 synapses for every one of the neurons. So this gets to about 700 trillion parameters. right now, there's actually been 3 in the last week leaps in AI technology.
So that's like the number of stars in the galaxy, for example. And so if the stars were somehow communicating with each other in the galaxy, that's what a brain it's almost like a mini galaxy is what the human brain sort of looks like. And so you're saying the 700 trillion is kind of the connections between the different stars that exist in the galaxy. The 700 trillion is the neurons that are firing between the receptors in the brain.
That's right. And our ability to process our environment multimodally. So basically language, vision, audio, and learn. And so, as we learn, we make connections in the brain, right? And so the estimate is there's about 700 trillion of those, very, very much akin to kind of the galaxy. The biggest model up until 2 days ago had 1.7 trillion parameters. So much, much smaller than that 700 trillion that's in the brain. Just yesterday or the day before, Google released a new model called Gemini 1.5 that has 2.5 trillion parameters.
Okay.
And what I was trying to show earlier with the parameters is it improves the ability for these models to understand. And so now Gemini 1.5, it's got 2.5 trillion versus the 1.7 trillion in GPT-4, is actually now benchmarking better than GPT-4. It's a more powerful model. It has a more complex understanding of the environment. And as a result, it's producing more insights, better answers, more complex answers. But it's still not the 700 trillion parameters that we have in our brains.
Right.
But we're heading there. And so if you follow Moore's law, which is that was about transistors or capacitors doubling every 18 months. I mean, we've probably blown that law away in many ways. But if you follow that in terms of the parameters, it will take us 8 years to get to 700 trillion. 700 trillion parameters approximately, 8 to 10 years, which is where I'm coming up with. I think it's 10 to 20 years before we reach some level of consciousness or sentience, because we're going to get to the models that are on par with the human brain in terms of their ability to take in information, to learn information, to make those connections multimodally, and again, it's very much like I think it's a very philosophical question around consciousness and how are we conscious and how the human brain works, and I truly have no idea. And I think we're still learning as a human race.
Sure.
Not sure if we really know as a species. We're still studying it, but what we're building is computers who are going to come close to that number of parameters, and I would suspect as a result they're going to achieve consciousness at that level.
So the human brain has created a sense of self, and so we have true self and we have false self in my mind, and with the sense of self that the human brain has created, we could refer to it as the ego might be the false sense of self that the human brain has created. Will AI, by becoming conscious or becoming sentient, does the AI have a sense of true self or a sense of false self?
So I think the question is how much of that is to do with our physical being and our interaction with others as humans. How much of it is how our parents treat us? How much of that is how our friends, the conditioning, how our friends treat us, our environment? I don't know the answer to that. And so, my gut reaction is probably not, because I don't think it has that same conditioning that we do, because it's, but as people interact with it and they learn just like they do. So if this, let's say we've got this 700 trillion parameter model now that goes out onto the web and starts talking to people, is it going to get bullied? Is it going to have people tell it that it doesn't like it? Is it, and is it then going to develop some protective mechanisms, which could be
Right.
kind of similar to ego.
Right. If it has feelings, if it
Yeah.
can it become hurt? Can it want to? Anger is an ego repair mechanism. If it creates a sense of self, will it have emotions that it will want to protect its sense of self?
And I would argue, I think to some degree that's consciousness underpins that, right? So
I would argue unconsciousness
or
underpins
unconsciousness,
that.
yeah, exactly. So,
Depending on the emotion,
Yeah.
if it's anger, then I would consider it to be unconsciousness. If it's compassion, if it's connectivity, if it's vulnerability, those would be consciousness.
yeah. So then, does AI have unconsciousness,
Right.
or is it just that kind of conscious part of the brain?
Does it have values? I guess it gets back to that question. Does it have values?
It does, and what has it learned, and what are the biases that it's in its data, basically? And I have no idea the answer to any of these, but
it's interesting.
But I hope to see it in my lifetime because it's just fascinating to see, and we'll learn a lot about ourselves, I think, through this process and how the human mind works and how intelligence really is formed, and consciousness and unconsciousness. I think it's I'm an entrepreneur, so I'm an insufferable optimist, and so I think about the positive side of this and like this is amazing, and I think about all the wonderful things that it's going to do, as opposed to the doomsday side of this.
Sure.
We obviously have to be, and I'm glad there are people who are skeptical and are worried about the doomsday side of it. I'm excited about what we're going to learn.
Yeah, for me, I don't know if it's skeptical or worried or fear or any of those things. It's just let's project forward what the future situation is going to look like, and let's be open-minded to the different paths and the different scenarios, and know enough about the technology itself so that we can visualize what those future scenarios look like. Without creating emotions, without creating fear, without creating anxiety, without creating worry, without creating optimism, without creating hope, without creating faith. Without creating any of those emotions. Can we just sit back and be the observer of what's happening, as opposed to getting involved with it on an individual mind basis and creating these emotions? Let's just figure out what are the paths. What are the possibilities? What can this thing look like in the future? And if if the possibilities are mostly we're going to have to turn off the power grid in order to have this thing shut down at some point because it's going to become out of control. That's not fear. That's just one of the possible scenarios. It's one of the possible outcomes of this thing that we don't really know what we're doing, and we are just optimistic, and we are just kind of putting this technology out there and building it and trying to go faster than everybody else and trying to become the people who can control it and wield it and use it, and with optimism in mind, as opposed to with just neither optimism nor pessimism in mind, just attempting to visualize the future scenarios. I just think that's so important for people like you, for people that the rest of the civilization is, it's like the people that control nuclear weapons that are sitting behind the nukes right now, that have their fingers, that have the ability to press the buttons. We want some sort of, understanding that, hey, those people are sane. Those people know what it means when they press this button. And so, for the rest of the American and the global population to have a sense of comfort that we know what the future looks like, because the people in Silicon Valley that are developing this stuff and creating this stuff are actually thinking about these scenarios and have a good understanding of what the future might look like. That would bring some comfort, but I think we don't. We just candidly don't. Like, we don't know all the different avenues. The human brain doesn't. Maybe AI will get to the point where it can understand what all the different possibilities of taking this technology forward on a company basis, on a country basis, on a military basis, what all of those pathways look like. And right now, from what I can understand, nobody knows, and that's not terrifying. It's just the situation, and it could lead to. Negative things if we consider them to be negative, if we consider a collapse of civilization to be negative. But a lot of things can lead to that, to your earlier point, Just, solar flare could lead to that. A nuclear attack could lead to that. Russia could lead to that. I mean, there's a million things that could, and we as a species continue down each of those paths. So it just seems like this is one more path that we're going down that we don't really have any. We're just kids playing with technology here that we don't really understand, essentially.
Yeah, and I liked your analogy of Oppenheimer and the discovery of like the nuclear bomb and things like that. I mean, it's very akin to that, and big worries in the 50s and 60s that our days were numbered, right? And so far we found ways to control it.
So far,
and the risk is non-zero as well. And present times are a bit worrying in that front, but the optimist in me says we're going to figure this out, and we're going to figure out how to control it, and we're going to figure out how to take this incredible power that we already have, today, and the incredible power that AI is going to bring in the future, and the capabilities that it's going to bring. The optimist in me says we're going to control the downside, and we're going to harness the upside, and it's going to be a power for good for humanity. And I, that's the way I think about it. It's the way I operate every day. It's like, let's do good with this. Let's create positive outcomes. And I'm fortunate, in the Silicon Valley and AI community, everybody I've worked with has that same mentality. It's like, we need to win the race, but we're going to find ways to control this. We're going to find ways to make it do good, not harm. And so for me, that's encouraging. And I'm more excited about what's to come than I am fearful about what's to come with this.
Yeah, good.
And on that front, I'd actually like to show you a new technology that's just come out, if that's okay.
Yeah, please. Yeah.
And now again, this might be like, well, this might not be very good, but so OpenAI just released a new technology in the last week.
Yeah.
And so OpenAI is famous for the large language models. It's now combined those with image output, and in particular video output. So there's always been this capability, for 6 or 7 years, to take text and have it produce an image. And that's been improving over time. The SAG-AFTRA strike, a lot of, what happened recently was about AI and actors and, the movie industry, the TV industry, worried about, what AI is going to do to the industry. What OpenAI just released this week actually makes all their points really valid. And I want to show you the what's now possible and what OpenAI just released.
Okay.
It's really incredible in terms of its ability to produce video. So what we're showing on the screen is an output from OpenAI Sora. And this is produced by a text prompt. So that the text prompt here is a stylish woman walks down a Tokyo street filled with warm glowing neon and animated city signage. She wears a black jacket and a long dress and black boots. And she walks confidently and casually. The street is damp and reflective, creating a mirror effect of the colorful lights. Many pedestrians walk about. So kind of, a couple of sentences prompt. And this is now producing 4K video that is hyper realistic. I mean, look at the reflections. Look at the way the jacket moves as she walks down the street. The pedestrians in the background as this
and none of it's real.
None of it's real. So this is all just from that's those couple of sentences. Look at the detail here, the earring as it moves and she's moving, the freckles on her face, the reflection in her glasses. I mean, it's simply stunning in terms of this capability to now simply type in a text prompt and produce a video. And so right now, OpenAI Sora is able to produce videos of 60 seconds. And we can look at some others. So this is woolly mammoths.
Wow.
And, you know, and you can read the prompt there around several giant woolly mammoths approach treading through a snowy meadow. And, you know, they've been extinct for a long time. And, you know,
13,000 years.
This looks like somebody went up to Alaska and had a video camera and videoed it. And here's another one of, you know, their movie trailer featuring the adventures of a 30-year-old spaceman. And the next video over to the right is like the coastline and video of a coastline. The next one over is you know, a bit more like a Pixar movie of an animated scene, and you know, you can see the incredible detail and the quality that it has just from a simple text. The next one's interesting. So this is basically a generously rendered papercraft world of a coral reef rife with colorful fish and sea creatures.
Getting trippy.
And so, you know, it's just incredible. This is two pirate ships fighting in a cup of coffee. And so, I mean, it's pretty incredible. Like, so, and let's, Ryan, if you don't mind, let's go down and look at some of the others. So this one is historical footage of the California gold rush. And it looks like a drone is just flying over, you know, a town in California in that period. I mean, it's incredible, the detail. It actually has a little bit of that grainy feel as well, like it was you know, a drone from 100 years ago or so.
It's incredible.
It's truly incredible. A Jeep driving on a kind of dusty road, and you can see the particle effects and the dust coming up from the back of the wheels, and you know, it's really just looks like video. And it's all created from just like in ChatGPT, just typing in a sentence, and it's producing this type of output. I want to show you some ones that actually aren't so good. So you know, so here's one where you can see there are a bunch of like wolf puppies here. There's like 5 gray wolf puppies. But if you notice, they're kind of spawning out from each other. Like, you know, they're just appearing. So this is where they've got a bit more training to do. This one's interesting. Like so the prompt is basically a basketball goes through a hoop and then explodes, and then all of a sudden some other basketball appears in the frame. The next one is one here where they're basically archaeologists to dig up a generic plastic chair in the desert. But look how this plastic chair kind of reacts. You know, it's like floating. It morphs. It's not doing what it's supposed to do at all. So it's the technology's not perfect. It's still learning. They're still training their way out of this, but this is an incredible leap forward, and they're going to, you know, smooth these rough edges off over the coming months for sure. But you can see like the archaeologists, you know, well rendered, and
none of them real.
None of
those people are.
No, it's completely fabricated and generated from just the text, and
they don't take the faces from real people. They just are creating it from a pixels, or what are they?
Yeah, so it's called a diffusion model, and it's just literally text converted to image. And you know, the question you asked is loaded, because it is trained on data across the web. So yes, your face is probably in there. My face is probably in there. You know, and so it absolutely is training on that kind of whatever's out there in public.
So those are people's images then?
Not necessarily. So there'll be like a combination of lots of, you know, millions of people's faces and different elements. So it's not going to produce verbatim someone's face. It might just by sheer fluke. But it is using effectively what's out on the internet as a source of the information, and then the tricky part about this is So there's large language models,
Mm-hmm.
and where we're headed is what's called multimodal AI. So we're trying to develop all of the senses.
Mm-hmm.
So language and text and vision and audio and touch with AR and things like that. Large vision models are much harder to produce because they don't have the same labeling of data. So if you think about text and what I was describing earlier, you can basically take all the text across the web. You can cut sentences up and say, okay, here's the end of the sentence, the beginning of the sentence. So take the beginning of the sentence and predict what the end of the sentence should be. And once it finds the right answer to that end of the sentence, you say, okay, you did a good job, and that's how you train it. And when it doesn't produce the right ending, you tell it did a bad job, and that's how you teach these models to produce output. With vision, that's much harder because the data is not labeled.
Sure.
It's so when you have an image, any image, it doesn't say on it, this is a car, this is a cat, this is a sofa, this is a plant. You have to find ways to teach it those things. And so it's much harder to build these vision models. And it is the next wave of AI that's coming. The ability to use a camera that can understand what it's seeing, not just categorize things, but actually understand what's in the image, help you process what you're looking at. What OpenAI has produced through this technology with text to real kind of 4K high quality video is incredible because it is not only able to take what we were able to do before is produce an image from text trained on lots of this kind of training data, but to then keep this in a moving picture. So basically, like a video is just lots and lots of static images stacked up. To keep the content the same and just iterate it very slightly in different frames, that's really sophisticated in terms of the underlying technology. I didn't think we were quite ready to do this yet. And it's so mind blown when I saw this a week ago.
Yeah.
Where this is taking us is, I think, going to have that profound fact, coming back to my point around SAG-AFTRA and the strike. What we just showed was now AI's ability to produce video that is indistinguishable from reality,
Right.
and from video we would produce ourselves.
Right.
And so as I think about the applications of that, there are many, I think entertainment related ones. There are a lot that are potentially very worrying as well. On the entertainment side, you can effectively now do things where you can recreate TV shows of the past, feed in all of the, I was a big fan of Friends and Seinfeld and all those kind of shows. And effectively now what you can do, and I personally think, I love the actors in those shows, but for me, those were all about the writing. So now with a really good writer, you don't need the actors, you don't need the sets, you don't need the production staff. You basically, if you're a really good writer, with this technology that we just demonstrated, you can sit at the keyboard and you can write an episode of Friends that picks up from the very last episode that was produced, whenever that
Uses
was.
the same characters.
Same characters,
same
would look identical, sound identical, same sets.
Right. And do you really even need the writer?
Well, arguably you could say, well, you could use a large language model to do the writing.
Yeah.
Now, I think I just demonstrated that it's not very good at
Not yet.
the humor.
Yeah.
Now, over time, as these models become more sophisticated, it will be able to do that, I think.
Right.
Short term, no.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it brings up a lot of questions, and it's super interesting. And so this will potentially lead to we won't need actors anymore. We won't need models anymore. We won't need producers. We won't need scripts. We won't need sets. We won't need to film on a location. All we need is a computer and software to create images that are not real, that we're looking at, that haven't been filmed anywhere. They've all been created within a computer processor.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so for me, it's not about good or bad, So I'd transcend judgment on that one. That's where we're going, and people just need to realize that and kind of understand that this is where things are going. Like we're not again, you can't put this genie back in the bottle. This is going to take the place of essentially human beings. I mean, in terms of so what we're going to be seeing, and maybe we will be people that want to see real actors, or that want to see, real sets that are filmed on real location. And so maybe there'll still be a demand for that. And so maybe there'll still be a supply of that. But this technology takes the need for that away completely.
It does. It does. Yeah. And that's what's stunning about it. It's, I thought this was some time away, and no, it happened last week, and now it's only 1 minute video, but a year from now it'll be a 30-minute video,
right?
And then 2 years from now it'll be full feature length,
right?
Movies,
right?
And absolutely, it's going to absolutely revolutionize all video production, or movies, TV, marketing, just completely revolutionize it.
Anything that we see and interact with on our phones, on a TV screen, at a movie theater, on any screen that we're looking at, anything that's not real that we're looking at is going to officially be not real.
That's right, and that's the scary part of it in terms of how you could then use it to fool people,
right?
In terms of what politicians are saying and what's happening in the world.
Right.
It's going to become very hard to distinguish between reality and what's been produced by AI.
And government control over that, and countries controlling that, because countries have always been releasing lies and disinformation. And I mean, the story that we hear about the Russia situation is completely different than the story that the Russians are hearing about the Russian situation, or the Chinese are hearing about the situation. I mean, we're the bad guys in this situation if you're in Russia or China. But so countries have constantly released lies and disinformation. And so now this makes it that much easier for everybody to just completely manipulate truth and reality and put out whatever information they want to convince whatever people they want to convince about whatever they want people to believe, and ultimately rally people against a small group of people or a large group of people, or create additional conflict, or create conflict between nations, between political groups, between religious groups. That's going to be extremely easy to fool people. The UFO phenomenon is no longer about what we've actually recorded and what we've actually seen and what witnesses have actually seen. We're going to be creating witnesses. We're going to be creating new UFO events. We're going to be creating new wars. We're going to be creating new, we're going to be telling people that this politician or this person said something, and we have it on tape and we have a recording of them saying it, but it wasn't actually them. I mean, it's the amount, we're not going to be able to believe anything that we see on a screen or a monitor or a television anywhere, and yet people will believe it. They will continue to believe it. And so it's for me, that is it's one of those realities that's not scary. It's not bad. It's not good until we judge it. It just is what it is. And it's going to be completely different, because reality with technology just goes away. I mean, and we're just not ready for, as a species, technology is developing so much faster than we're developing spiritually as human beings. And our level of understanding of ourselves and the nature of reality is we are essentially cavemen playing with nuclear weapons. And now we're adding a whole new weapon to that arsenal. We're just, we're not developed enough to be able to be playing with toys that are of this caliber yet, but yet we are, and we continue to develop them.
That's right. I mean, you see all of the evidence with TikTok and Facebook and how it's already influencing, and that's largely text-based, and it's largely algorithmically based. So it's pushing content based on other things that the people look at, and so depending on what you click on, you see certain topics and biases reinforced, right?
Yeah.
This takes it to a whole nother level, because having something that's text-based reinforced to you, and then seeing a video that looks completely real, with the the politicians or the real environment that something might be happening in, and it just, you can't distinguish whether it's AI or reality, is a whole nother level, and people are not going to be able to see through that well.
Right.
Now, OpenAI has not released this to the public yet for this reason. They have what's called a red team looking at it. So actually, if you go on their website and you look at all the videos, they have like a watermark in the video that is signifying that it was created by them, and it's AI generated. To your point about regulation, there's going to need to be some level of regulation around this for sure.
At the global level, though.
That's what's scary.
Which won't happen.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And or at least at the country level, what do you allow in? So do you allow other people's content to come into your country? South Korea actually already has a firewall around the country, and largely because North Korea is constantly feeding misinformation in.
Sure.
So they've actually solved that problem already, and they don't let that content come across the border digitally. We're going to be, I think, we're going to have to do that, and countries that want to get their arms around this type of technology and not create the potential bad outcomes and the hysteria that could result, are going to have to get their arms around this for sure. And and again, as an AI practitioner, I don't want the regulation on us building the models and figuring this stuff out, because I think we need to do that. But I do welcome the regulation in terms of the putting it into the public domain and how people are going to use it. I do think that should be regulated. I do think it should be controlled, and we should be thinking now about how we're going to get in front of this. The problem is that I don't know what the average age in Congress and the Senate is, but probably north of 70.
Yeah,
I think they're really slow on this stuff. They don't really get how fast this is moving,
right?
And they really need to be thinking about this now, not 5 years from now when. The cat's out of the bag already. 5 years from now, it's going to be influencing things dramatically.
Right.
I imagine this technology, as it comes out over this year, is going to influence the election.
Yeah.
And elections all over the world, and other things. And so we should be talking about this, and we should be getting people to think about how they control this.
Yeah, for sure. If we don't control it, then it controls us. And ultimately I think it gets to, there's going to be nothing that we can really believe anymore. And not that there is a lot that we can believe as truth today, because information is so manipulated and it's so belief-based. It's so based on points of view and perspective and opinion. But if we do get to the point where nothing is believable anymore, all the information that we're being fed has a equal or greater chance of being false than it does of being true. What does that do? I mean, what does that do to people, to our species? I mean, we lose faith in everything that we hear. And ultimately, I feel like that could create a major awakening with people, and potentially allow us to transcend beliefs. I think that a lot of times what we do as human beings is we confuse beliefs with reality. We confuse truth with opinion and perspective and fact, and that creates a lot of conflicts, and it creates a lot of disagreements and arguments. But if everything that we're being shown is ultimately just propaganda and opinion, and then potentially that could help us transcend what we've been taught since kids. I mean, when we're brought up as children, we're taught to believe that Santa Claus is real and the Easter Bunny is real, right, and the Tooth Fairy is real, and we're told that by the people that we trust with our survival. I mean, by our parents to keep us alive, and they're creating this false reality in us from a very, very early age. And that false reality, we only later find out is not the truth. For me, it was devastating when I was 8, 9 years old. It was like, what? Like that Santa Claus isn't real. The first thing out of my mouth was, what does that mean about the Easter Bunny? Like
Right,
I was devastated, absolutely devastated. And so from then on, I've really kind of questioned reality and beliefs and belief systems and kind of tried to really dive into them as much as possible and understand them and see them for what they are. And what I see them for as now is limitations. I see beliefs as limitations. And because when we believe something, we're excluding all of the rest of the possibilities that could exist out there in the world. And if everything that we see becomes something that is completely just manipulated and fake and just bogus, being created on like one of these screens that we see with this 4K imagery of real people and real faces and real voices. I mean, the whole thing at some point has to collapse. The whole concept of what's real and what's not, what's a belief and what's reality, has to come collapsing down, and potentially that could help us as a species, I think, transcend what is something that holds us back, and that is beliefs. For me, everything has a certain percentage chance of being true. And if we take it to 100%, we're a believer. And if we take it to 0%, we're a skeptic. But if we can just observe that this has a 50% chance of being true, or this has a 98% chance of being true, and this has a 3% chance of being true, without closing off our minds to the rest of the possibility of it actually being true, then we can actually make decisions that are based on reality as opposed to Santa Claus and the Easter Bunny. We can actually make decisions that can push us forward as a species. And so maybe all of this, this misinformation that's going to be coming out from this technology can allow us to transcend that part of humanity.
Yeah, so you're an optimist after all, right?
I don't know. I think that in order to get to I think that in order to have an awakening, you have to oftentimes you go through a very difficult time in your life, whether, going to prison or losing a loved one or losing your cell phone, like opens you up to the nature of reality and what is real. And so I do know that going through tough times can lead to classical awakenings, and that could potentially be what humanity is on the brink of right now.
I agree. I think what you said is really profound, and I've never really thought about it in those terms before, but I think you're exactly right. I mean, it's going to lead us to challenge everything.
Yeah.
It has to.
Yeah.
Because we're not going to be able to tell the difference anymore, and so it has to challenge everything.
Yeah.
Yeah, and again, that's what I find fascinating about what we're doing and where we're headed, and there is no way to stop that now. Right. There is only an ability to figure out how are we going to cope with this as we proceed. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I think that's incredibly profound, and I think you started with like, where is AI heading?
Yeah.
I think you just came up with a really good answer.
Yeah. Good. Yeah, I was attempting to remain agnostic prior to talking to you today because I know that just what I've heard and what from an untrained, unprofessional mind, what I know about AI, and I think it's basically what everybody thinks and knows about AI. But to be able to sit down with a professional who has a doctorate and who has studied this and who works in this every day has been eye-opening for me. And it's I wouldn't say completely in a way that's making me more comfortable about the technology but it is. But I think that with everything that we go through as a species and everything that we do learn, that there are, anytime we do go through a tough time, we come out of it in a more positive way. A lot of times going through wars, can lead humans to realize, why am I carrying this battle forward? Why do I carry yesterday and today? Why do I, what this country did to me or this person did to me yesterday? If that's where I get my identity from today, I'm just continuing to perpetuate that argument, that disagreement, that violence, that trauma, that just keeping it alive today. Why do we carry thought? Why do we have to keep those things alive? And so I do think that that with AI, man, if it could be it could be a source of a dramatic awakening. It might force us into actually becoming, a more evolved version of ourselves, and we definitely need that. I mean, with all the other things that we have to worry about with war and weapons and everything else that we're putting each other through, perhaps this could potentially lead us to something that's a brighter future than kind of what we're staring at today. So.
Exactly, and that's exactly the conclusion I've come to in a less profound way than you did.
Okay.
But yeah, I really believe everything you just said, and I'm really optimistic about what it's gonna be. I don't have fear of what's to come. I think it's going to be positive, but eyes wide open.
Yeah. Good. Love it. Yeah. What did we miss? It was a very deep conversation, much deeper than I had thought that it would be as we sat down this morning to kind of talk about this. But I guess, that's kind of where the topic takes you. It's where it takes my mind is like, thinking about the future and what this could lead to and what it could mean. And as we get into like the details of where we are today, like sitting here today to be able to create something like that, what does that mean for the near future, the midterm and the long term? And gosh, that's just, it's kind of where the topic takes itself as you talk through the possibilities.
That's right, and the only thing that's clear is it's going to change everything.
Yeah,
and it's going to change business. It's going to change our personal lives. It's going to change the world. It's going to change how countries interact with each other. It's going to create wars. It's going to stop wars. It's that I think that's the only certainty at this point. It's just a question of when and how and how much. And so, I spend my time thinking a lot about this, but also practical applications now. How do we use what's the current state, and how do we use it to our benefit now? And as I said at the beginning, this kind of real pushing of the boundaries now, other than the kind of small startups that are finding novel applications of this technology, it's really the purview of governments and these massive corporations now. It's just the compute power that you need to push AI forward is beyond any company that's not got $1 trillion in the bank, basically. And so it's fascinating to watch where they're going and what's coming, and then to I'm part of the community that's kind of feeding off the bits that fall off and developing the technology, finding novel uses of the technology for business right now as an example. But lots of colleagues who are figuring out how to, as we talked about, apply it into mental health and other applications of the technology. And I just think there's a lot of exciting, good things to come, and I do think it's going to have a profound impact on us. But I also agree, it's like it's those stages of change and transformation, and the valley of despair is ahead of us, and before we climb out of that and kind of find the right transformation with the technology, I'm sure.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah, well, good. Did we miss anything? We got into a lot, very, very deep. Is there anything that we didn't touch on?
I don't think so.
Yeah.
I think we probably touched on at least the broad topics that people will be interested in, and we didn't talk about kind of current practical applications, but I'm not sure. As soon as you talk about a current practical application, it's next week it's obsolete.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
So I feel like we covered where it's going, and hopefully a little bit of education of how some of these things work today, and how generative AI works as an example, because that's the piece that most people interact with day to day. We didn't touch on some of the other AI capabilities, but I think that's okay. And I think got into that kind of profound, deep, where's this going conversation.
That's usually where my mind goes.
Yeah. And I think it was a really interesting conversation.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, totally agree. Well, I'm excited to have you on our board because regardless of where technology goes and where the AI conversation goes, we need to know where it's going because it changes so fast.
It does.
And to be able to have a good grip and a good understanding of where the technology is and where it's headed at any point in time, we can't, we don't want to be blindsided by that at any point in time. And so having you and your expertise and your connectivity to the topic is critical. So I do thank you for joining us, and I'm excited about
My pleasure.
what you're going to bring to the company, and certainly. I think there's a lot of good things to come. And as the conversation changes over the years, I think that it would be great to have you on once a year or so and just, to talk about an update of, where things are, and where things are headed. So we'll have to do that over the years.
I would love to do that. Really enjoyed this.
Yeah. Good.
My first podcast, hopefully.
Yeah. You did great.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, for sure. No, it was a lot of fun. So, with that, we'll just wrap it up. And again, I appreciate you being here.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for the invite.
All right, awesome. Yeah, good. I don't know. That was very, very deep. I took that in a direction that was completely not where I was thinking that.